Hi, I'm Phil from the Soundproofing store, and today we're talking about the 3 best ways to soundproof a solid wall. Whether you're trying to block unwanted noise from neighbors or soundproof the walls of a music room or home cinema, the following 3 principles will ensure you get the best results. Now, those 3 principles are: 1, increase the mass of the wall. Number 2, add resilience to the wall. And number 3, decouple the soundproofing from the structure. Now stick around and we'll go into those 3 points in a lot more detail. And at the end, we might even throw in some extra tips for you too. The first principle with soundproofing a solid wall is to add more mass. Now basically, the heavier and the more dense a material is, the harder it is for airborne sound to pass through it. So increasing the mass will improve the wall's sound reduction performance. Now, there are many materials that you can use to add more mass, but some examples of common materials used in the industry are acoustic grade plasterboard, Tecsound, and mass loaded vinyl. Now, acoustic grade plasterboard works just like standard plasterboard. It can be cut like standard plasterboard, skimmed and decorated like standard plasterboard. The only difference is that it's far denser. So where standard plasterboard weighs around 8 kilograms per meter square, acoustic plasterboard weighs around 12.8 kilograms per meter square, to give you a big upgrade in that mass. Now, Tecsound and mass-loaded vinyl are basically very heavy, very dense rubber membranes. Now, they're a little more expensive than plasterboard, but the beauty is that they add a lot more mass for their relative thickness. So if you need to save space, which, let's face it, most of us do, these are ideal. Now, as a bit of an example, again, going back to the acoustic plasterboard, this is 12.8 kilograms per meter square at 15 mil of thickness, whereas the Tecsound SY100 is 10 kilograms per meter square at just 5 millimeters of thickness, which means it's over double the mass for the same thickness. Now, another benefit of the Tecsound is that as well as adding mass, it's what we call a viscoelastic material, which means it also helps to dampen the energy and vibration of sound. And we'll touch on why that's important in the next section. There are a few important points to remember about adding mass. Firstly, the different types of mass have different sound reduction performance for different frequencies of sound. So using a combination of different masses within the same system, for example, adding all of these together, will give you a much better overall performance than using multiple layers of the same material. For example, using 2 layers of just the plasterboard back to back. Secondly, there is what we would refer to as a law of diminishing returns with adding mass. Now, as a rough rule, every time you double the mass of a surface, you get roughly around a 5 decibel reduction in volume. So the more mass the wall has, the harder it is to get more improvement by only adding mass, because it gets more difficult to keep doubling the mass of the wall. And thirdly, adding mass helps particularly with higher pitch sounds. However, the lower the pitch of the sound, the stronger the vibration. So to achieve good sound reduction, we need to dampen and absorb that vibration energy. And so again, just adding mass directly to the wall will give limited results. To improve the results further, the mass needs to be able to dampen the energy and vibration of sound. And that leads us to principle number 2. The second principle to follow when soundproofing a wall is to add resilience to the wall. What I mean by that is that soundproofing needs to be able to flex to dampen the sound vibration, because vibration travels through solid rigid materials very easily. The more flexible the wall is, the greater its ability to absorb sound energy and vibration. A perfect example of this is how the suspension springs or shock absorbers in a car work. If you drove a car with no shock absorbers over a pothole, you'd feel this awful jarring impact. Whereas because modern cars are flexible and mounted on shock absorbers, now when you drive over a pothole, the car absorbs the impact and you have a comfortable ride. This is exactly what your soundproofing needs to do. Here at the Soundproofing store, we use a system called the ReductoClip System. This is basically a shock-absorbing suspension system for walls and ceilings. By adding this onto your structure and then mounting your mass layers onto the ReductoClip system, this will help you block a much wider range of sound and a higher volume of sound. The third key principle for soundproofing a solid wall is to decouple any soundproofing from the offending structure. And this is because sound energy can travel more easily through connected surfaces. Now, we're going to go a bit old school with this next example, but I'm sure many of you watching probably did this in school when you were kids. If you connect two tin cans together with a piece of string and you pull that string tight and talk into one of the tin cans, your voice comes out of the second can as a kind of makeshift rudimentary telephone. And I'll show you by pointing this end towards our microphone up here and talk in. Hello, hello, hello. Now, this is a perfect example of how sound physically travels through solid materials by vibrating through the can, down the string and into the second can, where it then resonates and amplifies. And this is exactly what happens within the structure of a building, with the sound traveling through the solid structure. The best way for us to stop the sound traveling into the second can is to cut the piece of string with a pair of scissors so that the cans are completely disconnected or decoupled from each other. The way we do this with a wall is to build an independent stud frame in front of the offending wall, but with an air gap so the frame isn't touching the wall at all. When we add the soundproofing onto that stud frame instead of the offending wall, this means losing a bit more space in the room, but it greatly improves the sound reduction performance, particularly for lower pitch sounds. A really good example of a system that incorporates all of those three key principles is our Independent ReductoClip System. This is our highest performing system. We use this in applications from domestic properties with bad noise from next door, right up to music studios, home cinemas. This is also the slimmest independent clip system on the market. The system is installed onto an independent stud frame, at least 10 millimeters away from the offending wall, and this gives us our decoupling. We then have our ReductoClip system installed onto the front of the frame. This gives our mass layers more resilience, and the system is finished with multiple layers of mass and a combination of different mass. So in this example, we're using 2 layers of acoustic grade plasterboard, sandwiching a layer of Tecsound SY100 in the middle. Now, if you'd like to learn more about our ReductoClip system, we'll leave a link to that in our description of this video, or you can have a look on the website at www.soundproofingstore.co.uk. So that's our big 3 key principles. And again, the more of them you incorporate into your soundproofing system, the more effective the results will be. Just adding mass or just decoupling will give limited results, but combining all of the principles will give you amazing results. Well, as you've stuck around to the end, we thought we'd reward you with a couple of bonus tips for soundproofing a solid wall. So top tip number 1, make sure your mass layers are acoustically sealed and airtight. Think of soundproofing like waterproofing. If there are any gaps that air can pass through, sound can pass through. So a bead of acoustic sealant to fill any small gaps will get everything airtight. Top tip number 2 is to acoustically insulate any cavities. For example, with our system, because we've built an independent stud frame, we've created a hollow cavity between the offending wall and the mass layers. When sound gets inside of that cavity, it will echo and resonate and amplify. So by filling the stud frame with a high density acoustic mineral wool, any sound that gets into that cavity can't bounce around and echo. It's all being absorbed. And the final tip is that you want to do it once and do it right. Soundproofing gets much more costly when you make mistakes. You have to pull it down and start again. Soundproofing can be very complex and every situation is different. So speak to an expert who can advise on the best way to solve your problem in your specific circumstances and use a proven soundproofing system. As ever, if you have any questions at all, or you need any soundproofing advice for walls, floors, or ceilings, for everything from domestic properties all the way up to home studios, please pick up the phone, give us a call. We're here to help.